The call from my mother came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was knee-deep in quarterly reports at the office. I almost didn't answer. After 32 years of being her daughter, I'd developed a sixth sense about when to let calls go to voicemail. But something made me pick up. "Tara, darling," she chirped, her voice dripping with that sugary sweetness she reserved for special occasions or when she wanted something. "How are you?" "Fine, Mom. Just busy with work. What's up?" I balanced my phone between my ear and shoulder, trying to finish an email. "Well, your father and I have been talking, and we want to do something special for your birthday this year." My fingers froze over the keyboard. In my entire adult life, my parents had never made a fuss about my birthday. When I turned 30, they sent a text message, 2 days late. For my brother Jake's 30th, they threw a weekend-long celebration at their lake house with catering and a live band. "My birthday?" I echoed, unable to hide my surprise. "Yes, dear. 33 is an important year. We've reserved a private room at Castellino's for Saturday. Just family, intimate." Castellino's was the most expensive Italian restaurant in the city, the kind of place where they don't put prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. "Wow, Mom, that's unexpected." "Don't sound so shocked, Tara. We care about your milestones too. Always the qualifier with me." "That sounds nice," I said, trying to sound appreciative rather than suspicious. "What time?" 7 o'clock. "Oh, and wear something nice. Not one of those shapeless pantsuits you always wear to work." And there it was. I almost laughed at how predictable she was, unable to extend an invitation without slipping in a criticism. "Got it. See you Saturday." After hanging up, I sat back, in my ergonomic office chair, staring at the ceiling. My parents had never given much thought to my birthdays. When I was 8, they forgot entirely because Jake had a baseball tournament that weekend. When I graduated with honors from college, they spent most of the dinner talking about Jake's internship prospects. When I bought my apartment in the city 2 years ago, the first major purchase I'd made completely on my own, they asked why I'd chosen a place so far from them and Jake. My brother, 3 years younger, had always been the golden child. The basketball star, the charming one, the son my father had always wanted. Growing up, Jake's achievements were celebrated with parties and presents, while mine were acknowledged with polite nods and reminders that humility was a virtue. I twirled, my pen between my fingers, wondering what this sudden interest in my birthday really meant. My parents weren't the type to have epiphanies about their parenting failures. There had to be an angle. For the rest of the week, I found myself unusually distracted. I bought a new dress, not because my mother had criticized my work clothes, but because I decided I deserved something nice. It was midnight blue with silver threading that caught the light when I moved. I paired it with the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me when she died, the one relative who'd always seen me clearly. By Saturday evening, I was a bundle of nerves as I pulled into the restaurant parking lot. I spotted my parents' luxury SUV immediately, parked crookedly across 2 spaces as my father always did, claiming it prevented door dings. Next to it was Jake's sports car, which our parents had helped him finance last year despite his shaky employment history. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, applied another coat of the burgundy lipstick that made me feel confident, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The maitre d' led me to the private dining room at the back of the restaurant. The table was already set with fine china and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier. My parents sat at one end, my father in his usual tailored suit, my mother draped in designer wear with her carefully maintained blonde highlights. Jake sat beside them, scrolling through his phone. My Aunt Patricia and Uncle Daniel were there too, which surprised me. They lived 2 hours away and rarely made the trip into the city. "There she is." My father stood, his smile looking almost genuine as he came to kiss my cheek. "The birthday girl." "Hi, Dad," I said, accepting his brief embrace. My mother air-kissed both my cheeks. Darling, you look lovely. That color actually works with your complexion. I swallowed the retort that rose to my lips. Thanks, Mom. Jake finally looked up from his phone. Hey, sis, happy birthday. He raised his wine glass in a lazy toast. Aunt Patricia hurried over, enfolding me in a warm hug that smelled of her signature Chanel perfume. Tara, sweetheart, look at you. Absolutely beautiful. 33. I can hardly believe it. Uncle Daniel squeezed my shoulder affectionately. Happy birthday, kiddo. You're looking more like your grandmother every day. That was the highest compliment in our family. My grandmother, my father's mother, had been the matriarch, strong-willed and fair-minded, in a way my parents never managed to be. I slid into the empty chair between Aunt Patricia and Uncle Daniel, grateful for their buffer. A waiter appeared almost immediately with a glass of champagne. We already ordered a bottle, my mother explained, the Dom Pérignon. The champagne was exquisite, but it did little to calm my nerves. Something felt off about the entire evening. So, Tara, my father began once everyone had their drinks, how's work? It's good, I replied carefully. I'm up for a promotion to senior account manager next month. That's wonderful, Aunt Patricia said warmly. My father nodded. Finance suits you. You've always been good with numbers. My mother sipped her champagne. Though it does take up so much of your time. Patricia was just saying her daughter-in-law left that world to focus on family. And there it was, the familiar pivot to what I wasn't doing right. I enjoy my career, Mom, I said evenly. The hours can be long, but the work is rewarding. Of course, dear. Though you know, your biological clock... Mom, Jake interrupted, surprisingly coming to my rescue. Let's not go there tonight, okay? It's Tara's birthday. My mother pressed her lips together, but dropped the subject as the appetizers arrived, a spread of bruschetta, calamari, and antipasto that could have fed a small army. As we ate, the conversation drifted to safer topics. Aunt Patricia's garden renovation, Uncle Daniel's golf game, and surprisingly, my recent trip to Montreal for a financial conference. My father actually asked follow-up questions about my presentation there, which might have been a first. After the main course, I'd chosen the truffle risotto, which was divine. My mother clinked her glass. Before dessert, she announced, we have some gifts for the birthday girl. This was getting stranger by the minute. My parents had never been big on birthday gifts for me, certainly not ones presented with ceremony at expensive restaurants. Aunt Patricia went first, handing me a beautifully wrapped package. Inside was a vintage silk scarf from Hermes that must have cost a small fortune. Pat, this is gorgeous, I breathed, running my fingers over the delicate fabric. Thank you so much. You've always had an eye for the classics, she said, patting my hand. Just like your grandmother. Uncle Daniel gave me a first edition of my favorite novel, inscribed with a touching note about how proud he was of the woman I'd become. Jake pushed a small box across the table. Inside was a sleek smartwatch. To replace that ancient thing you're wearing, he said with a grin. This one tracks your heart rate and stuff. Thanks, Jake, I said, genuinely surprised by his thoughtfulness. This is really nice. My parents presented their gift last, a slender envelope that my mother handed over with a flourish. We wanted to give you something special this year. I opened it carefully, half expecting a gift certificate for a makeover or cooking classes, my mother's usual passive-aggressive gifts. Instead, I found a card with a handwritten note. To our daughter Tara on her 33rd birthday. Your steadfast independence and financial wisdom have always been your strengths. We're counting on those qualities now more than ever. With love, Mom. And Dad. Beneath the card was a brochure for a realtor? I looked up, confusion evident on my face. I don't understand. My father cleared his throat, straightening his suit jacket as he always did before delivering what he considered important news. Tara, we've always admired your responsible nature. Unlike some in this family, he cast a pointed glance at Jake, who suddenly became very interested in his wine glass. You've made sound financial decisions. Your apartment, my mother continued, the one downtown, it's appreciated considerably since you bought it. I felt a chill run down my spine. Yes, I know. That's why I bought in that neighborhood. Well, my father leaned forward, his tone shifting to the one he used for business negotiations. We need you to sell it. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient restaurant noise seemed to fade away. Excuse me? I finally managed. Mother reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled back. Darling, it's for Jake. He's in a bit of financial trouble. I turned to my brother, who wouldn't meet my eyes. A bit of trouble. My father sighed heavily. Your brother made some investments that didn't pan out, and there were some gambling debts we weren't aware of until recently. How much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Just under 300,000, my father replied. The room seemed to spin. My apartment, my sanctuary, the place I'd saved for years to buy, the first thing that had ever been truly mine. They expected me to sell it to bail out Jake. Again. No, I said, the word falling from my lips before I could even process the full request. My mother's expression hardened. Tara, this isn't a request. Your brother needs help. He always needs help, I shot back, and you always expect me to provide it. My college fund that went to his car, my inheritance from Grandpa that mysteriously needed to cover Jake's business venture. And now my home? It's just a place, my father said dismissively. You can buy another one once Jake gets back on his feet. I laughed then, a hollow sound that silenced everyone at the table. Back on his feet? When has Jake ever been on his feet? When has he ever faced a consequence for his actions? Now, Tara, my mother began, her tone sharpening. This family helps each other. Your brother would do the same for you. Would he? I challenged, turning to Jake. Would you sell your car, your condo, to help me if I were in trouble? Jake at least had the decency to look ashamed as he stared at his plate. This is different, my father insisted. Jake has potential. His new business idea just needs capital. And what about my potential? I asked, my voice rising. What about the life I've built for myself, despite the fact that you've never supported my choices the way you support his? My mother's face flushed with anger. That's not true. We've always what, Mom? Always remembered my birthday? Always attended my graduations without complaining about the time commitment? Always treated my accomplishments with the same enthusiasm as Jake's? Aunt Patricia placed a steadying hand on my arm. Christina, she said to my mother, perhaps this isn't the time or place for this discussion. My father waved her off. No. Pat, this needs to be addressed. Tara, your brother is family. Family comes first. I'm family too, I said quietly, a lifetime of hurt bubbling to the surface. But I've never come first with either of you. That's ridiculous, my mother snapped. We've given you everything. You've given Jake everything, I corrected. You've expected me to give him everything too. My father's jaw tightened. If you won't help your brother, then perhaps we need to reconsider certain arrangements. What arrangements? He exchanged a look with my mother. Your position at the firm, for one. I was the one who recommended you to the board. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you threatening my job because I won't sell my home to cover Jake's gambling debts? I'm reminding you of how much this family has done for you, he replied coldly. I stood up, my legs shaking but my resolve firmer than it had ever been. I earned my position at the firm through hard work and dedication. If you want to try to undermine that, go ahead. But I will not sell my apartment. Not for Jake, not for anyone. My mother's face contorted with rage. After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me, Mom? What have you ever done that wasn't calculated to either control me or benefit Jake? The question hung in the air, unanswered. I grabbed my purse and the gifts from Aunt Patricia and Uncle Daniel. "Thank you for dinner," I said, addressing the table at large. "And thank you both." I nodded to my aunt and uncle for the lovely gifts and for always treating me like I matter. "Tara," my father's voice held a warning note. "If you walk out now, there will be consequences." I met his gaze steadily. "There have always been consequences for me, Dad. For being independent, for setting boundaries, for refusing to play the role you assigned me. I'm just finally deciding that I can live with them." And with that, I walked out of the private dining room, through the restaurant filled with oblivious diners enjoying their meals, and into the cool night air. I made it all the way to my car, before the tears came, not tears of sadness, but of relief. As if a weight I'd been carrying my entire life had finally been set down. My phone buzzed in my purse, a text from Aunt Patricia. "So proud of you, sweetheart. Call me tomorrow." I drove home to the apartment my parents wanted me to sell, my sanctuary in the city, with its big windows and the small balcony where I grew herbs in the summer. The place that was mine, earned through my own hard work. As I kicked off my heels and hung up the midnight blue dress, I realized something profound. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my parents without backing down. I had refused to sacrifice my needs for Jake's wants. It felt terrifying. It felt exhilarating. It felt like freedom. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, my phone had accumulated 17 missed calls and 12 text messages from my parents and Jake. I ignored them all, made myself a strong cup of coffee, and opened my laptop. The first order of business was looking up the firm's policy on nepotism and employment. As I suspected, my father's influence might have helped me get an interview 7 years ago, but he had no power to terminate my employment. I had risen through the ranks on my own merit, with performance reviews. To prove it, the second task was more painful. I opened my banking app and looked at the automatic transfers I had set up years ago. $500 to my parents every month to help with their expenses, despite the fact that they lived in a paid-off house and my father's retirement package was more than generous. Another $300 to Jake's utility account, a holdover from 3 years ago when he had been temporarily unemployed. I canceled both transfers with a few clicks. It felt like severing an artery. These financial ties had been how my parents kept me connected, kept me feeling obligated. You couldn't say no to people you were supporting after all. By Monday morning, I had steeled myself for the fallout. It came during my lunch break, my mother calling from a number I didn't recognize, probably guessing I was screening her calls. "Tara Elizabeth," she began without preamble when I answered. "What you did Saturday night was unforgivable." I took a deep breath. "What part, Mom? The part where I refused to sell my home, or the part where I pointed out the truth about how you and Dad have always treated me? Your father and I have always wanted what's best for you and your brother. No. You've always wanted what's best for Jake, and you've expected me to want that too." She made a sound of exasperation. "You've always been so dramatic, so selfish." "Selfish?" I echoed, almost laughing at the absurdity. "For wanting to keep my own home? For expecting to be treated with the same consideration as my brother?" "Family helps family, Tara. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you." The mention of my grandmother, the one person who had always seen me, really seen me, sent a flash of anger through me. "Don't you dare use Grandma to manipulate me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "She left me those pearl earrings because she knew. She knew how you and Dad favored Jake, how you diminished me at every turn. She would be ashamed of you, not me." There was a moment of shocked silence on the other end of the line. "I noticed you've stopped the transfers to our accounts," my mother finally said, her voice cold. "Yes, I have. Your father will be very disappointed." "I'm sure he will." I checked my watch. My lunch break was almost over. "Is there anything else, Mom? I need to get back to work." "You know, Tara, one day you'll need us. and we might not be there for you the way we've always been. I thought about all the times I had needed them, the school plays they'd missed, the academic awards they'd downplayed, the breakups they'd dismissed, the career milestones they'd overshadowed with news of Jake's latest adventure. You've never been there for me the way you've been there for Jake, I said quietly. I've always been on my own. At least now I'm acknowledging it. I ended the call before she could respond, my hand shaking slightly, but my resolve firmer than ever. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and adjusting to my new reality. My father called once, his tone businesslike as he explained the family's disappointment in my decision. Jake texted a few times, alternating between guilt trips, mom's been crying every day, and casual requests for money disguised as catching up. I maintained my boundaries with a firmness that surprised even me. To my father, I simply reiterated that my apartment was not for sale. To Jake, I responded with variations of, I'm sorry to hear that, but offered no financial assistance. It was Aunt Patricia who kept me sane during this time. We met for lunch every Sunday, her warmth and genuine interest in my life a balm to my soul. They'll come around, she assured me over salads at our favorite cafe. Or they won't. Either way, you're doing the right thing. It doesn't feel right, I admitted. It feels selfish. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Tara, setting healthy boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary. Your parents conditioned you to believe that putting yourself first is wrong, but only when it applies to you. Jake gets to put himself first all the time. I considered this. They never expected him to bail me out of anything. Exactly. The expectations have always been uneven. But they're still my parents, I said, voicing the thought that had been haunting me. Am I a terrible daughter for cutting them off financially? Aunt Patricia's expression softened. Sweetheart, your parents are adults with their own resources. They don't need your money. They wanted the control it gave them over you. As for being a terrible daughter, were they wonderful parents? The question hung between us, its answer too painful to articulate. By the 6-week mark, I had settled into a new routine. Work kept me busy, and I'd reconnected with friends I'd neglected while catering to my family's demands. I'd even started dating again, meeting a kind architect named Adam who took me to art galleries and jazz clubs. Then came the text from my mother. The mortgage payment is due next week. Your father and I are counting on your contribution. I stared at the message in confusion. My parents' house had been paid off for years, a fact they'd mentioned often when comparing their financial stability to Jake's series of bad investments. I called Aunt Patricia. Did Mom and Dad take out a second mortgage on their house? There was a long pause. They didn't tell you? Tell me what? She sighed heavily. They remortgaged the house last year to help Jake start that fitness app company, the one that folded after 3 months. The revelation felt like a punch to the gut. How much? I'm not sure of the exact amount, but it was substantial. Daniel and I advised against it, but you know how your parents are when it comes to Jake. I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. My parents had leveraged their paid-off home to finance yet another of Jake's failed ventures, and they'd been using my monthly contributions to help make the payments, all while living a lifestyle that suggested financial security. The next day, I received a formal-looking envelope in the mail. Inside was a copy of my parents' will with sections highlighted in neon yellow. The document left their house and all its contents to Jake, along with their investment accounts and my father's valuable coin collection. To me, they had left a nominal sum of $5,000 and my mother's costume jewelry. A post-it note in my mother's handwriting was stuck to the front page. This is what happens when family members don't support each other. I sank onto my couch, the papers trembling in my hands. This wasn't just about Jake's debts or my apartment anymore. This was a calculated attempt to hurt me, to punish me for asserting boundaries. For a moment, I felt that familiar wave of guilt and obligation. Maybe I should help with the mortgage. Maybe I should sell my apartment. Maybe being the good daughter was worth the cost to my independence and self-respect. Then I looked around at my home, the space I had created for myself, the sanctuary I had earned. On my bookshelf sat the framed photo of my grandmother, her eyes kind but resolute, the same expression she'd worn when telling my mother, "You can't control an adult daughter, Christina. The harder you try, the more you'll lose her." I picked up my phone and texted my mother back. "I won't be contributing to the mortgage payment now or in the future. I suggest you speak with a financial advisor about your options." Her response came within seconds. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us?" I didn't respond. There was nothing more to say. That night, I slept better than I had in years, as if my body finally understood that I was no longer responsible for carrying my family's financial and emotional burdens. The harassment began 3 days later. First came the barrage of calls from unknown numbers, my parents and Jake taking turns, each with their own approach. My father was coldly logical, explaining how my abandonment was causing the family to consider drastic measures. My mother oscillated between tears and threats. Jake tried cajoling, then guilt, then outright demands. I blocked each number as it came up. Then they started showing up at my workplace, my mother in the lobby one day, my father ambushing me in the parking garage the next. Security eventually had to escort them out, a humiliation that only fueled their anger. Emails followed, dozens of them, with subject lines ranging from urgent family matter to "you are killing your mother." The final straw came when I arrived home one evening to find Jake sitting on the floor outside my apartment door. "You need to leave," I said, not breaking stride as I unlocked my door. He scrambled to his feet. "Tara, please, just hear me out." Something in his voice, a note of genuine desperation, made me pause. 5 minutes, in the hallway. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Mom and Dad are going to lose the house. The bank called yesterday. They're behind on 3 payments. I leaned against the wall, suddenly tired. "That's not my problem, Jake." "But it is. They remortgaged to help me, and now, exactly. They remortgaged to help you, not me. This is between you and them." His face flushed with anger. "You've always been so perfect, haven't you, Miss Independent? Never needed anyone's help." I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. "Are you kidding me? I've needed help plenty of times. The difference is, I never got it. Not from them, and certainly not from you. That's not fair, isn't it? When I needed help with college tuition, where were you? When I was working 2 jobs to make rent after graduation, did you ever once offer to spot me for groceries? When I went through that awful breakup with David and could barely function, did you come stay with me to make sure I was okay?" Jake had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know. None of you did. As long as I was handling things on my own, you could all pretend I didn't need anything." He was quiet for a moment. "I never thought of it that way. I know." I straightened up, suddenly, bone-tired of this conversation, of this dynamic that had defined my entire life. "Your 5 minutes are up, Jake. Go home." "Tara, please." "No." The word came out firm, final. "I'm done setting myself on fire to keep all of you warm. Figure it out yourselves." I went inside and shut the door, turning the deadbolt with a satisfying click. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Rebecca Chen's office was sleek and minimalist, much like the woman herself. She listened without interruption as I explained the situation, the financial coercion, the harassment, the escalating attempts to force me to comply with my parents' demands. When I finished, she nodded once. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize, especially in situations where there's a clear golden child and scapegoat dynamic. Is that what this is? Abuse? She tilted her head. What would you call it when someone uses threats, intimidation, and emotional manipulation to control your financial decisions? Put that way, it seemed obvious. What are my options? First, document everything. Every call, every email, every unwanted visit. Second, we send a cease and desist letter. It has no legal teeth, but it establishes a paper trail and shows you're serious. Third, if they ignore that, we look at a restraining order. A restraining order against my own parents, I murmured. I never thought it would come to this. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Family estrangement is painful, Ms. Reynolds, but sometimes it's necessary for your own well-being. I left her office with a strange mix of sadness and resolve. That evening, I changed my phone number, email address, and all my social media settings. I spoke with my building's security about not allowing my family members access. I warned my assistant at work to screen my calls and visitors carefully. It felt like preparing for a siege. In a way, it was. The cease and desist letter went out the following Monday. By Wednesday, my father had left a blistering message with my lawyer, threatening countersuits for emotional distress and family abandonment, neither of which, Rebecca assured me, were viable legal claims. My mother took a different approach, sending a tear-stained letter via certified mail, detailing all the sacrifices she had made as a parent and how my cruel rejection was destroying her health. The letter concluded with a transparent attempt at manipulation. If something happens to me because of this stress, I hope you can live with yourself. I added the letter to the documentation file Rebecca had instructed me to maintain. 2 more weeks passed. The harassment tapered off, not out of respect for my boundaries, I suspected, but because my parents were facing the very real prospect of foreclosure. Through Aunt Patricia, I learned they were frantically trying to sell assets to keep the bank at bay. They're blaming you, of course, she told me over our Sunday lunch. But Daniel and I made it clear we won't be dragged into their drama. We support you, Tara. That means more than I can say, I admitted. I keep wondering if I'm doing the right thing. Do you feel free? She asked simply. I considered the question. The constant knot of anxiety I'd carried in my chest for years had loosened. I was sleeping through the night. I was making decisions based on my own needs and wants, not on how they would impact my family's demands. Yes, I said. I do feel free. Then you're doing exactly the right thing. A month later, I received notice from Rebecca that my parents had sold their house, at well below market value, but enough to settle the mortgage and avoid foreclosure. They had moved into a small rental unit on the outskirts of the city. Jake, unable to maintain his luxury condo without my parents' subsidies, had moved in with them. I felt a pang of, not guilt exactly, but a complex emotion I couldn't quite name. These were still the people who had raised me, however imperfectly. Their diminished circumstances weren't what I had wanted. I had simply wanted to be treated with respect and fairness. Do you want to send a message through me? Rebecca asked when I called to discuss the update. Sometimes in these situations, once the dust settles, family members want to establish limited contact. I thought about it for a long moment. No, I finally said. Not yet. Maybe someday, but right now I need this distance. I understand. Keep taking care of yourself, Ms. Reynolds. That's your only obligation right now. That night, as I watered the herbs on my balcony, basil, mint, and rosemary thriving in their pots, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. The birthday dinner that was meant to manipulate me into financial servitude had instead catalyzed my liberation. My phone chimed with a text from Adam asking if I was free for dinner the following evening. I smiled as I typed back a yes. This new relationship was developing slowly, thoughtfully, without the shadow of my family's demands hanging over every decision. I leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the city lights. For the first time in my life, I was truly standing on my own ground, figuratively and literally. My home was secure. My boundaries were intact. My future was entirely my own to shape. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. There would be difficult days ahead, I knew. Moments when I questioned my decision, when the cultural expectation to reconcile with family at any cost would weigh heavily on me. Holidays would be particularly hard, but I also knew I couldn't go back to being the person I was before, the dutiful daughter who sacrificed her own well-being to appease parents who would never be satisfied, who would always put Jake's needs above mine. As the evening breeze carried the scent of my herbs into the apartment, I made a silent promise to myself. From now on, my life would be built on reciprocity, not sacrifice. On mutual respect, not obligation. On genuine love, not manipulation. It wasn't the family narrative I had been raised to accept, but it was the one I was choosing to write for myself. And for the first time, I was the author of my own story. 6 months after the birthday dinner that changed everything, I received an unexpected email from Jake. It had been forwarded through Rebecca, respecting the communication boundaries I'd established. Tara, I've been in therapy for the past 3 months. It was court-ordered after you. I got a DUI, but it's actually helping. My therapist suggested I make amends to people I've hurt, and you're at the top of that list. I won't pretend to understand everything you've been through, but I'm starting to see how unfair things were. Mom and Dad always made it seem like you were the strong one who didn't need anything, while I was fragile and needed constant support. I never questioned it because it benefited me. I'm not asking for money or help. I'm not even asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to understand, and I'm sorry for my part in all of this. Jake. I read the email several times, searching for the manipulative angle, the hidden request, but it seemed genuinely contrite. I decided not to respond immediately, giving myself time to process this unexpected development. 2 weeks later, Aunt Patricia mentioned during our lunch that Jake had found a job as an assistant manager at a sporting goods store. It's entry level, she said, stirring her iced tea, but he seems committed. Shows up on time, doesn't complain about the work. Your parents are mortified that he's doing menial labor, of course. I couldn't help but smile at that. God forbid he earn an honest living like the rest of us. Patricia's eyes twinkled. Exactly. Daniel thinks it's the best thing that could have happened to him, learning the value of actual work. And Mom and Dad? How are they doing? She considered the question. Adjusting. The rental is small, and they've had to sell a lot of their status symbols. Your father's coin collection went to a collector in Boston. Your mother's designer wardrobe has been significantly downsized. Are they still blaming me? Less than before, she admitted. I think reality is starting to sink in. They made poor financial decisions for years, using their resources to enable Jake instead of planning responsibly for their retirement. I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. There was no satisfaction in my parents' reduced circumstances, but there was a certain justice in them finally facing the consequences of their choices. Have they asked about me? I couldn't help asking. Patricia reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Your mother asks if you're eating enough, in that passive-aggressive way of hers. Your father pretends not to care, but always lingers when I mention what you're up to at work. And what do you tell them? The truth? That you're thriving, that you've been promoted to senior account manager, that you've met a nice man who treats you with respect, that you're happier than I've ever seen you. I felt a lump form in my throat. Thank you for being my connection to them without undermining my boundaries. Always, sweetheart. Always. As summer turned to fall, I settled deeper into my independent life. The promotion at work came through, bringing new responsibilities and a significant salary increase. Adam and I continued dating, our relationship growing more serious with each passing month. I expanded my social circle, joining a book club and a hiking group, filling my life with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. I did eventually respond to Jake's email, a brief message acknowledging his apology and wishing him well in his recovery journey. We weren't ready for more than that, might never be, but it felt like a small step toward healing. My parents remained at a distance, respecting the legal boundaries I'd established, though I occasionally received updates through Aunt Patricia. They had adjusted to their new financial reality with predictable responses, my father stoic and aloof, my mother dramatically martyred. But they were managing, and without my financial support. As my 34th birthday approached, nearly a year since the disastrous dinner that had set all these changes in motion, I decided to celebrate on my own terms. I rented a private room at my favorite restaurant, Not Castellino's, and invited the people who had supported me through this difficult year, Aunt Patricia and Uncle Daniel, Adam, my closest friends from work and my social groups, and even Rebecca, whose legal guidance had given me the framework to rebuild my life. The evening was filled with genuine laughter, thoughtful gifts, and a cake that actually featured my favorite flavor, lemon, not the chocolate my mother had always insisted I preferred, despite my protests. There were no hidden agendas, no manipulative speeches, no expectations beyond celebrating another year of my life. As I looked around the table at these people who truly saw me and valued me, I realized something profound. I had created my own family, not one bound by blood and obligation, but one connected by mutual respect and genuine care. It wasn't the life I had been raised to expect. It was better, richer, more authentic, and entirely my own. Later that night, after the party had ended and Adam had gone home with a sweet kiss and promises to call the next day, I stood on my balcony again. The herb garden had flourished over, the months expanding to include lavender and thyme, their scents mingling in the night air. Below me, the city pulsed with life and possibility. Above, stars punctuated the darkness, distant but steadfast. I thought about the journey of the past year, the painful severing of unhealthy bonds, the establishing of firm boundaries, the gradual building of a life based on reciprocity rather than sacrifice. It hadn't been easy. There had been days of doubt, moments of grief for the family relationship I had always wanted but never had. But standing there, in the home I had fought to keep, surrounded by the life I had deliberately created, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. I had broken the cycle of emotional and financial manipulation that had defined my family for generations. Whatever happened in the future, whether reconciliation eventually became possible or the estrangement remained permanent, I would face it on my own terms. The birthday that was meant to trap me had instead set me free, and that, perhaps, was the greatest gift my parents had ever given me, though certainly not the one they'd intended. I smiled up at the stars, feeling both grounded and limitless. This was my life now, mine to shape, mine to cherish, mine to live authentically, and I wouldn't have it any other way.